All right. Hey, everybody. It's another night. We're doing these series. I'm still trying to come up with a name for it, but 6 o'clock every night this week, we are talking with different people, interesting people. The time of coronavirus is all around us, and so we're adapting with everything else. Different nights are different discussions. Later tonight at 7:30, we actually have an infectious disease doctor, so we're going to talk about the corona there. This conversation we have, I'm very honored to have Addisu here with us. He's the campaign manager for Cory Booker. Just thank you so much for joining us.
Honestly, when you DM'd me the invite, I was honored. So it's good to be with you and whoever is watching.
Well, I will say that in the last, almost 2 years at this point, I'm honored to be called Cory a friend at this point. And in fact, I go from senator, I have the guts to call him Cory.
He thinks it's weird when you call him senator, so it's Cory.
And he always jokes every time we see each other, we have the same haircut. And so
I usually do, but this is my shelter in place afro, I guess, for me. It's about as long as I let it get. So
I've cut my own hair for 7 years, and last cycle there was one time I couldn't find my clippers, and so I bought it. I had a haircut for the first time, and it was unusual. So.
It's true, me too.
Yeah.
Thank God for my clippers.
So let folks know a little bit about your past. You grew up in Atlanta, is that right?
Yeah, I was born in Canada, but when I moved to the States, I grew up in Atlanta, and I'm an American citizen now, but an immigrant.
Oh, there you go. And then you went to this small school called Yale.
I did. I did twice for college and law school, though. Yeah.
So what got you into politics? Especially you went to law school. Did you plan to go into politics after law school, or how'd you get in?
So I really fell in love with campaign politics. I was always sort of interested in public policy and law. But I fell in love with campaign politics during the 2000 election. I was in college at the time, and it was my senior fall was the 2000 election. And I found myself staying in and watching MSNBC while all my friends were going out and partying during the whole Florida debacle. And so I was like, okay, this might actually be something that is a real passion of mine, and I found it fascinating and what have you. And so that's what got me into campaign politics, and what ultimately made me choose it as a job and eventually a career was 2002, actually, which was an election where Democrats got beaten pretty bad in the run up to the Iraq War. But at that point, in basically the beginning of 2003, I decided I wanted to do something about it, and a campaign sounded like the time to do it. So 2001, I fell in love with it. 2002 election is when I decided to try it out as a job, and then I ended up in Iowa in 2003, and now it's 2020. I'm still doing it.
What are some of the campaigns that you've worked on to let folks know?
Yeah, so my first campaign I started on my birthday, which is June 1st, 2003, in Iowa as the field organizer, one of the two for Polk County. I had the western part of Polk County and ultimately central, basically downtown Des Moines around Drake and up through Beaverdale, Murmurdale was my turf. And so that was my first campaign. I stayed on with the Kerry campaign, obviously, through the general election that year. And then I did Harold Ford's race in Tennessee in 2006. I did Clinton in Iowa in 2008, and then Obama in the general. I ran Cory Booker Senate race and as presidential. I ran Governor Newsom's campaign out here in 2018. So I did Clinton in 2016 in the general election. So yeah, when I say it that way, it's a lot, I guess. Somehow I went from being that 23-year-old kid in Des Moines to now 40 years old in a couple of weeks, and still doing it, but I still love it.
I just turned 40, so I get it. So one of the things, how did you get connected with Booker originally in the Senate race?
Actually, through a friend who worked on the Buttigieg campaign this cycle, but Hari Savugan, I don't know if you know him, he was a senior advisor to the Buttigieg campaign. Back in 2013, Cory was thinking about running for either governor against Christie or Senate if the seat opened up at the beginning of 2013. And so Hari and I had worked together, I think, at the DNC. which I did for a couple of years there in 09 and 10 after I graduated from law school. And he just put me in touch with Cory. I flew out to interview for a job that was as yet undefined at the beginning of 2013. And then when Frank Lautenberg, the senator from New Jersey, passed away, unfortunately, and there was a special election called for a couple of days later, Cory basically called and said, all right, we need you here in 3 days. And so next thing you know, I was in Newark running a Senate race that I hadn't even really interviewed for. But yeah, it was through a friend, really through a friend I'd worked with in politics. That's how I've gotten most of my jobs, honestly, in campaigns, is just from previous campaigns. It pays forward, at least the interviews.
How in the world have you worked on all these campaigns and you went to law school?
So yeah, I kind of yada yada the law school thing. But after we lost in 2004, I actually remember writing my law school admissions essays about losing the 2004 election after working for a year and a half for John Kerry. And I started in 2005. I graduated in 2008. I basically only worked the 2006 cycle for a couple weeks in GOTV in Tennessee for Harold Ford. And then in my 3L year, my dean hopefully isn't watching, but he probably knows this by now. My 3L year is kind of a tradition to kind of, not tradition, amongst political people to kind of get out of town. And so I actually left New Haven, even while still enrolled, and moved back to Des Moines in October of 2007. And then the caucuses, luckily, that year were on January 3rd, so I managed to make it back in time for finals. But really, from 2005 to 2008, I was kind of out of the game, with the exception of doing the GOTV in 2006 in October, and then in Iowa for a couple months before graduating and getting back on the trail after I graduated.
How about this time when Cory decided to run for president? How did that work? You don't have to much it out, but just like kind of
it's fine.
How does
it? No, I started talking to him probably around when he did the what was it called then, the Fall Gala? One in 2018.
Yeah.
Is when, because I had worked Iowa in 2004 and 2008, so he and Matt Clapper, his chief of staff, called and asked for a little advice about Iowa and what it would be like to go there. And I said, you're going to be great. And I think that trip to Iowa, honestly, was one of the things that probably convinced him, that day was what convinced him to run. So throughout the fall of 2018, we were kind of talking, and then sometime in the winter, he basically, I went through a process. It wasn't offered to me off the bat. He said, if I do this, I want you to run it. I accepted on the spot. And I was at that time running Governor-elect Newsom's race, and dealing with his transition. And next thing you know, ended his transition. He got inaugurated, and I flew east literally the next day to start up with Cory's campaign at the beginning of last year.
So this is like your first time in years that it's you've been able to breathe a little bit?
It's awesome, man. I mean, not March, certainly not the COVID isolation, but since I got home at the beginning of February, since I did 16 in New York, 17 and 18 with Newsom, 19, back in the East Coast with Cory. So it's been 4 years since I've had a real break. So it's been a nice time to get a little bit of a breather, although unfortunately it's now in the midst of a global crisis. But at least I get to see my wife again. I'll look at the bright side, which is nice.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Fall Gala, because actually it was right before our election. It was in October of 2018, and we made a decision not to attend because, I mean, we were trying to do everything we can, go everywhere, and we felt we didn't have the capability of spending a half day or whatever in Des Moines. Weeks before a campaign. And so we actually then, so we heard Cory's speech. Everyone was so moved by it, as often they are when they've seen him speak live. And then we actually picked him up, and we did an event that next morning, or maybe it was 2 mornings later, in Boone. And it was just an agriculture. We were doing some on agriculture, and it was amazing because we were hoping, because it was at like 10 a.m. on maybe like a Thursday or something like that. So it was midweek, and we were hoping to get 30 people. we had over 200 people jam packed in that. And
Wow.
there was, yeah. And that was a great trip for him. But on the way from where I picked him up to the event, we had, I think, CNN and maybe like,
yeah, I actually remember that in the RV. Yeah.
And then I'm driving, he's playing Jovi and Bruce Springsteen and sitting shotgun. And then all of a sudden, for about a quarter mile, there was this bald eagle that just was probably
wow.
25 feet and just stayed with us.
Stayed with.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was just, it was pretty special. And so that was the first time I ever met Cory. And so it was fun. So.
I really do think that trip, not just the gala, but he did a couple things that trip. He fell in love with Iowa for sure. And also, I think, realized at that point that he would enjoy the process of the Iowa caucuses and running for president, generally speaking, in a different way, because, you know, at that point it was even though we were in the midst of the midterms, you especially,
right.
it was that the cycle was kind of starting up at that point. And when he got back, I think, is when the talk started in earnest.
Yep. So talk a little bit about building, what it's like to build a presidential campaign. Like, how do you hire? How do you do all that?
You know, it's funny when I was considering taking the job, or after I'd taken it, I called David Plouffe, I called Jim Messina, I called, you know, Robbie Mook, like the people who'd done it before. And I was like, am I ready for this? You know, and the answer is no. Like, nobody is really ready. Honestly, no one is really ready for it. But you have to kind of do it the way you see fit. I don't think there's a right answer. The way I did it essentially is I started in two places, which was a budget and an org chart. And, you know, that process actually really helped me figure out what I wanted, because, you know, I could have trying to tie those two things together made me realize what I needed, how I wanted to structure things, who I was looking for, as opposed to just, you know, scooping up folks and fitting them into boxes that may not be appropriate for what I'm trying to build or what their skills are. And so I basically spent, you know, December of 2018 doing that, and then a lot of January and February in particular recruiting people. And this is just me, you know, we obviously put together a strategy too, which I could talk about, but I felt, and I still feel very strongly, that campaigns are people and about people, and presidential campaigns maybe even more so. The ability to work together as a team and get more than the sum of the parts is like everything when you're understaffed and under-resourced and fighting every day in a foxhole. And so I spent personally a lot of time as the campaign manager recruiting good talent, calling people. I had Cory do the same. He basically interviewed everybody, even during the campaign after he declared. I made sure he talked to most of my senior staff, or at least the people who directly reported to me, because I wanted him to have a relationship with them. So a lot of it was me just doing human resources. A lot of it is budgeting. And then once you have a team up and running, you know, first of all, we put together a strategy, which was very heavy on Iowa and very heavy on early states, which I think played to Cory's strengths and what he wanted to do. But his strength is retail politics and always was going to be. So we wanted to lean into that. And then I had my team just execute it. And I tried the hardest part of the job was taking a step back and realizing that as the campaign manager, my job wasn't really actually to do a lot of things. It was to manage other people into doing their jobs better and delegate things. And that's something I've learned over time. But in a presidential campaign, it's even more important to not micromanage. And I think I got way better as it went along. But the people I hired, from my deputies to Mike Frozelone in Iowa, you name it, those folks they did all the work. And I don't want to take any of the credit for it. I just tried to let them hire good people and let them off the leash to do it.
Yeah, we're excited to have Mike in the IDP, and I think he's going to do a great job in the executive director role there. One of the things I thought about your campaign, especially your campaign, and it's hard to tell because I wasn't part of it. It just from an outsider perspective, but it seemed like you guys really dignified all the staffers, and like there's so much of campaigns are just chewing up people and spitting them out. It seems like in politics, and it's horrible to say, but I mean that's the reality, and it's awful. But you guys, I felt made people feel like a full person. How do you go about that in a campaign? I know that's
no, it warms my heart to hear you say it, because literally, and my staff from Iowa and others can attest to this. It was one of the values that we put on the board way back at the beginning, was literally treat people like full human beings. And I think a lot of that comes from experience. I was a field organizer, which is, I guess, the lowest, I don't think of it this way, but the lowest on the totem pole in a campaign in Iowa, in a presidential. So that's where I started. I know what those folks were going through. And so I know how difficult it is, especially for folks who are in rural areas or alone in an office and may not actually have peers around them to do their job alongside. So it was really, really important to me to do that. And frankly, it started with Senator Booker. Like, that's the kind of person he is. He invests in people. People are loyal to him because he's loyal to them. And I wanted to make sure that ethos was in our campaign from the top down, starting with me. And so I made a real point of it to get to know people. I also remember how motivating it was to me to have our state director, to have our campaign manager come through, know my name, engage with me, and so those little things go a long way. So it started with Cory and just sort of who he is and wanting to make sure that the campaign reflected his best values. But I also think it's a motivational tactic, no doubt about it. And it's how, in really tough times, and this campaign was hella tough, you get people to fight through those tough times and keep pulling in the same direction.
And I mean, again, I don't know the inside of the campaign, but I know who was out here in Sioux City. Jonah did a heck of a job.
Jonah, yeah.
And
Jonah's also a funny story, because Jonah was an intern on the Senate race that I ran when he was in high school in New Jersey. Yeah, and he came to me. When he got the offer from Sterner or Frozelone or whoever it was to come to Iowa, he asked me if he should do it. And I was like, absolutely. Yeah. But he had been an intern on my Senate race, and I think felt comfortable coming to me and asking if he should do this, and I was happy to give him that advice. Obviously, I wanted him on the team, and he ended up doing a great job in the West. So yeah, there were a lot of Jonahs in our campaign. I like to think, and I hope someday one of them is going to run a presidential campaign, and I'll be long retired by then. But and hopefully they'll win and do great things for the country. So.
Okay, I want to tell folks who are watching, we're open to questions, and we have one already. So if you're open to it, Rebecca asks, how would you advise the eventual Democratic candidate about connecting with voters ahead of the general in this time of social distance, and if that continues to the fall?
I think things like this are good, actually. And one thing I think is actually just an interest. I think this is true regardless of if we were in a time of global pandemic. Social distancing is, in the current world, people really want to know not just their candidates, but I think they want to know sort of everybody around their candidates. People expect to in a world of social media, a lot about celebrities now, a lot about your politicians, about people in general. And so I think there's an expectation amongst voters that you reveal more of who your real self is. And I think that's something that can both be, I think it's good politics, but I think it's compelling content. And so that's probably my number one piece of advice, I guess, to the extent I have any, is like, if we're stuck behind screens for a couple months, or if things don't really get back to normal as we get into the winter and fall, be a little, the summer and fall, be a little vulnerable, and put yourself out there as candidates, introduce your staff and your family and others to the world. And then you have more pieces to play with, for lack of a better word, to push your message. But not everything has to be a message driven, trying to persuade voters thing. Sometimes you just want to introduce the human bit and the humans behind the campaign and behind the candidate. And that, I think, especially now in this world, we are starving for human contact. So revealing that, I think, will be good politics, but also give us the ability to do more messaging.
Cool. Adam Henderson also just wants to say hello.
What up, Adam Henderson?
He's
that.
working at Iowa State.
Love that guy. I know he is. And one of our great, he was in the ROD, the regional director for Polk County, and just did an amazing job. So God bless you, Adam. And good luck in law school this fall. He's going to law school. So shout out him.
Wow.
Sorry, I broke news. Henderson. You should have told me if that wasn't for public consumption.
You know, all this talk about law school, the best decision I made in my life was not going.
It's funny. I never practiced. Obviously, I went right back to Obama. Next thing you know, it's 12 years later. But I met my wife. I got a great education. Met some great friends. And someday, I think I'm going to use the degree in a more substantive way. I don't think I'm long for the campaign world, just because, again, I'm getting into my 40s now. I'm not, unlike some. I'm not going to run for office. I don't think any day. So I'm like, I got to go to a second half of my story at some point here, and maybe the law degree will come in handy.
As my baseball career was dwindling, which was pretty much from the start, but I wanted to go to law school. I'm fascinated with law, and so I started working as a paralegal to just get some experience, because nobody in my immediate family was a lawyer, and so I didn't know what it all meant. And it was right around 2008 when I started. And I had so many of my friends come up to me who are all attorneys and just like, don't do it. Just don't do it. And I mean, it is meant, for some people it was good. For me, it was the right decision. For other people, I get it. So for each their own.
Yeah. I told Adam this, and I'll tell anybody out there who's considering graduate school in general, if you don't have a reason to go, don't go. It's just debt. Otherwise, but if you really feel like
and that's what I think a lot of my friends, they graduate college and they didn't know what was next. And they're like, oh, let's go to law school. And
no, that's a good way to get an expensive piece of paper on your wall.
So going back to the campaign a little bit, one thing that you guys, I thought and Cory did an amazing job. I mean, just he naturally brings it out, is talking about justice and racial justice. And in this time of the coronavirus, it's so much uncertainty. We're talking about tests not being available or as much as need be. And what there's a BuzzFeed article that makes me want to ask this question about Black and brown families are falling behind when it comes to being able to have testing for them. Can you just talk about that, and also talk about what it meant to bring racial justice into a mainstream of the campaign, like it should be. And I thought you guys did such a great job with that. So
yeah. Well, I think so on the COVID response. I just think one of the things that I just have to realize also, as I am here in my home in California, sort of safe, comfortable, I can get by, is just recognizing the privilege that we have, that and using it right for the powers of good. And so I, trying to remember every morning, there are people who are, especially now at the beginning of the month, who, are looking at the bills on their table and trying to figure out how the hell they're going to do it. And those people are disproportionately, obviously low income, but disproportionately African-American, Latino in this country. And I saw a survey recently, I think Change Research did one, that said that Latinos in particular, something like 41% of them are feeling basically economically insecure here at the beginning of the month. And that's a remarkable number. I mean, it is so many people. And, one of the things that Cory, and this goes to the second part of your question, one of the things that Cory talked about a lot is just the common pain that we have in this country. And it is, whether you are Black, brown, white, Asian, Native Americans on tribal lands right now, we are experiencing all of this together. And the pain that we are feeling is the same, whether you're in rural Iowa or in inner city in New York. And understanding that there's a disproportionate effect that comes to communities of color, but also understanding that there are people like that white people in rural Iowa who are like that too. And just I think a lot of this is just not forgetting the commonality that we have in all of this. And to go to your second part of your question, that was something when we talked about the strategy at the beginning of the campaign. One thing that Cory said from the jump, and I was totally fine, in fact, happy to do, is he knew what he wanted to say. And he knew that that winning was going to be possible, but not likely for any of us who ran for the nomination.
Right.
But that he wanted to leave a mark on the campaign by talking about what he wanted to talk about. And two of the things that he wanted to talk about were that there's more in this country that unites us than divides us, and racial justice issues, and the idea that poor communities like the one he lives in, particularly poor urban communities, are just taking it on the chin and have been for decades. And just getting rid of Donald Trump is not going to be enough to solve those problems. And similar to this, last thing I'll say here, not to be long-winded, but we got to get rid of Donald Trump. No questions asked about that. But when Joe Biden takes the oath of office on January 20th of next year, he's going to have a lot of problems at his door that he's going to have to deal with that existed before Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump will have just have been made worse. And so we have to empower. We have to keep that in mind at all times and empower our elected leaders and remind our elected leaders at all times that there's just things that unite us that are beyond politics. And it was really, really an honor to run a campaign that, even in losing, I think, lifted that message up in a moment where, especially now, we desperately need it.
One thing in running last time and running this time, in a district like this, we're the second most agriculture producing district in America. We're very rural. But one thing that we're really picking up right now are Dollar Generals are coming in and undercutting local grocery stores. And so even in the second most agriculture producing district in the world, or in America, we have food insecurity and just it's one of those things. And what I thought you guys did so well is what I loosely refer to as the Dollar General Coalition, because it's definitely in rural areas, but it's also in urban areas as well. And that coalition of trying to find, it's not an easy way to talk or a message to get across. And often these folks are not the most active voters. And so it's near and dear to my heart as well. And just trying to build that coalition, because exactly.
It's everything. It's when I was, sorry to interrupt you, but when I was reading sort of campaigns to model our campaign after, and the one that I kept coming back to was Jesse Jackson's in '88, which I think, obviously 2 black men running, sort of, there was obvious reasons for me to study that campaign. I have some friends who worked on that campaign, now mentors, I guess. But one of the things I think he did so remarkably well was not just unite sort of working class people of all races, but talk about it. And I think that's, it is really, the Rainbow Coalition is like a powerful metaphor, but it also is the truth, which is you have people, the majority of this country are people who are struggling to make ends meet, working middle class, rural, urban, and they have so much in common when it comes to the struggles that they have. And we just need to say that out loud and be okay with the fact that we're different. And Cory, I think, wanted to embody, he has embodied that. That's the first candidate he ever voted for, was Jesse Jackson in '88, he said. So, so he, I'd like to think we picked up a little of the baton of that campaign in ours.
There's one of the things, there's 2 parts of that. I love the fact that Jesse Jackson had his office in, I think it was Greenfield, Iowa.
Really?
It wasn't in Des Moines, it was in the rural area. But one of the people who's very near and dear to my heart, who's a member of the Winnebago Nation, he was an activist for many, many years. He passed away this past summer, Frank Lemaire. And he was a member of the DNC. He was the head of the Native American Caucus for a long time. And I asked him initially, I was like, how did you get politically active? And he said that in, I think it was 87 or 88, it must have been 87 leading up to 88. Jesse Jackson spoke in Dakota City, and there's a big old meatpacking plant in Dakota City. And the union went on strike. And the plant got rid of all the union workers and hired people for $1 less than what they were hiring. And so Jesse goes over there and sees all the people across the street all lined up, all the new workers. And he grabs the mic and goes, "To all you scabs, for all of you who took the job at $7 an hour, someone's going to take your job for $6 an hour." And Frank goes, "I've never heard anybody say that before." And he goes, "That got me motivated." And he was this amazing activist in the state of Nebraska and across this nation. And
wow.
and he was the first person I asked advice when I decided to run in 2018. And I go, "Hey, Frank, do you have any advice?" And he goes, "Well, you want change, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, I want change." He goes, "Well, if you want change, you have to get uncomfortable. And once you get uncomfortable, you have to get others uncomfortable." And
Yeah.
I mean, I took that to heart. And those words just are right in here with me. And so it's interesting
It's real.
that, yeah. So I guess a couple questions before I let you go. And then again, thank you so much for your time. What was it like to, there's always difficult decisions to be made in campaigns. What was that like at a presidential level? Like I can't imagine, like I can only view it from my scope of here running a congressional race, and just the amount of places you got to be at, the amount of everything, and everyone has advice for you. I get that.
That's for sure.
And you have to set up meetings with people from Sioux City, Iowa, because all that stuff. Like I get that. But what can you talk about? Some, you don't have to actually like talk like say what the tough decisions were, but just what's the thought process on that high of level stuff?
It's a very good question. I mean, I'm just thinking of some of the tougher ones, and a lot of them were about money, obviously, which, as the campaign manager, the buck stopped with me. I'd say, part of it is having a trusted group of people you can count on, both internally and externally. We had what we called our executive team, which was basically everybody who reported to me. It was 9 people, finance director, a couple, the people you would think, political director, et cetera. And I really leaned on those people. We basically operated as a team in every way. And ultimately, defining how a decision is made and making sure that everybody understands that and can offer their advice as appropriate is important. But I made most of the tough decisions. But there's also there's a group of people who I counted on outside of the campaign that I would call, that I felt, really mentors that I could trust, that I could lean on for the real tough ones. And some of them are people who are in politics and some of them are not. Some of them are my friends who, it might be nice to get that input from somebody who's not living it every single day. So I don't think there was ever a paradigm for how a decision was made. It depended on the level of importance of it. Sometimes it didn't make it to me. I did try to delegate a lot of decision making to the Frozen Loans of the world at the state level, and even to my deputies and that executive team members to not bring stuff to me when I felt like it wasn't necessary. But anything that ended up on my desk was a tough decision, which is kind of the way it should go for a CEO, right?
Yeah.
Of a little company. And I generally would seek the advice of my closest advisors, Matt Clapper at the top of that, who is now Corey's chief of staff and was my senior advisor. And then, sometimes Cory, sometimes not. And we'd go forward. But the nice thing I will say about our campaign is Cory Booker, and every candidate, you probably have learned this too, has a different approach to this, but I think every candidate, the best campaigns are the ones who empower their campaign managers to be the boss and don't let people go around to the candidate to second guess them. And I never had that from Cory. He made it clear I was the boss from the jump. He would question my decisions certainly often and want input on them often. But if something was, we were a united front, certainly me, Matt, and Cory were a united front on literally every decision. And that made it a lot easier to be the boss and tell people no sometimes, a lot of times, which was a hard part of my job as well.
Yeah. Hypothetical situation, you're a campaign manager against one of the most controversial and disliked members of Congress in a very rural district. How would you go about running that campaign?
Gosh, you're doing a pretty good job of it, man. I have to say. I mean, I'm not just saying that because it's present company, but not an easy district. But I think the approach you took in 2018 and you're taking again now is the right one. I advise this to any candidate who is challenging an incumbent, whether that be in a primary or not, is you got to outwork your opponent. That's where it starts. And showing up is so valuable. It is just, in my opinion, it is so valuable to just be places. And so my number one piece of advice is something that you've certainly taken up, was just show up. Now, a lot harder to do in this time. You're trying to figure out ways to do it virtually, but showing up is number one. And it's amazing when you think about the incumbents who have been beaten. It generally is the ones who forget to be there when their constituents need them, and forget to be present and just be responsive to them. And I am a person who is I'm fine with somebody being a 20-term incumbent if they're serving their constituents well. And there are plenty of those members in Congress, but there are also 20-term incumbents who, just sit in Washington all day and haven't done a town hall in a decade, and those folks probably should go. So showing up is number one. Husbanding your resources is obviously an important thing. Most people make their decisions in down ballot races in particular towards the end of the cycle, and so making sure you have enough money to compete there. And then, leaving no stone unturned is something I learned in the '08 campaign. I ran GOTV for Obama in Ohio. We went to places where there were small pockets of African Americans, but you never would know if you looked at the county or looked at the city demographics or partisan breakdown. And you know this more better than anyone. There are Republican counties that might go 80-20 for Donald Trump or whomever, but 20% of Democrats is like, that's still people. Yep. And those people have neighbors, and those neighbors may, and if you can up that margin from 20 to 25, it's not like you need to win everywhere, but you do that in a few places and you can make a real difference. So finding those places is a big strategy, I think, for folks, especially folks who are challenging in red or territory.
Yeah, that's great advice. Last question. Following you on Twitter, it's very clear you're a huge Golden State Warriors fan. I will say, in high school, and I shouldn't say this before the whole choking experience, I was a huge Latrell Sprewell fan, and I had a Latrell Sprewell jersey. I mean, it was one of those things. For some reason, I loved the fact that he played the most minutes in the NBA. And I just was like, that's a workhorse. That's who I like. But with Steph Curry, if he was on a different team or a different era, would he be the player he is today? I think, or go ahead and answer it and I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I think era. Yeah. If he were in a different era, he would be like an alien because, I actually was watching some classic NBA because, it's on TV all the time now. I think I was watching like a Celtics Sixers game from the 80s or something. Yeah. And, they have wide open, they're leaving people wide open from the 3-point line, literally like standing in the key. And, Steph would shoot from half court, let alone right behind the 3-point line. So I think he'd be great in another era. I do think Golden State is the right place for him in a lot of ways. He's never going to leave. Like they won't. This place would riot if he ever. He is the most beloved athlete probably this region has ever seen. But I think his style would work anywhere. He's one of the best players of all time. Probably it's going to end, in a top 25 player of all time, let's call it, when all is said and done.
I watched as I hit 40, I've seen my better days athletically. So I've been hitting the treadmill a little bit more when I was able to go to the gym. But I would always time it with like, there would always be like a classic on ESPN Classic, like a classic college basketball game. And I watched like Rasheed Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse and those teams. And like, they're leaving guys open at the shorter 3-point. Like it was all athleticism.
A totally different game. Totally different game.
I got one last question.
Shoot. Go ahead.
Okay. Maggie, who is 10 years old, would like to know, what was your favorite part about working with Cory?
That's a really good question. Cory is one of those people who is just a deeply compassionate person. And honestly, the way he treats people is inspiring. And it's amazing to me that you can have somebody who has ascended to about as high in politics as you can aspire to without ever compromising his values, core values. And that is just, he's a role model to me in that way. But that was the best part about it, is he deeply cares about people. He still stays in touch with people. Like, this wasn't just about the relationships he built through this campaign, whether it would be with staff or Iowans or you name it, were not transactional in any way. He just is somebody who loves people, and to be around somebody like that all the time and somebody who brings the best out of people is like, I think it made me a better person. So that was my favorite part, is just watching him deal with human beings and sort of modeling my behavior, honestly, around that is like something I'm grateful for. But it was the best part to see those moments in small towns in Iowa or big rallies in Detroit, whatever it might have been, where he connected with human beings, and you could see what politics should be and what a good politician can be.
Yeah, I will say, of everyone I've got to meet, like listening to Cory, like in any setting. I remember doing an event in Harlan with him, and it was at midday, not a lot of people, but just like I always walk away just being more inspired. And
yeah, that's the kind of guy he is, and it's. I think people are cynical about politics, but
Oh, yeah.
To answer Maggie's question very specifically, I could watch, being around Cory, you can watch cynicism melt away from people. And that is, you got to be grateful for that. It was pretty awesome to see, even though we were unsuccessful in the end. I think we were successful in other ways.
Yeah. Well, Addisu, thank you so much for taking time. Be safe. Good luck with whatever you decide. I hope you get some rest after working 8 years or whatever.
Yeah. And good luck to you. I'm going to contribute some more money to you because I believe in you, which I have done. You can check the reports, but this isn't the first time. But good luck to you, and especially in this crazy, crazy time. I hope what you do succeeds, and that we see you in Washington next year.
Thank you, sir. All right.